have this on Facebook, as you can see the camera is only turned towards here. So don't worry, it's not going to pan to you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But what we will do is that I'll give you a chance to introduce yourselves each, you know, where you're from, and basically who your name, where you're from. And then we'll start the Facebook, the video. Then the panel members will introduce themselves. And we'll have 10 minutes each for their presentation, and then we switch the Facebook video off so that our discussion can be free and we don't have Facebook coming in, and we can ask each other whatever blasphemous questions we want to. That's fine. Okay, so when we start on this side, you can just introduce yourself, please.
Okay, perfect. So I am Nelson. I am from the OECD Net Forward, which is a network of foundations working for development. Yes, I do have two acronyms for those of us keep having trouble keeping tabs with it. I'm Colombian and we just suffered a big World Cup loss. So it's going to be okay?
I'm Proserpina Dlamini Fisher. I'm recently retired, sort of, but I own a company called Educational Aspirations, so it's interesting to be here. But I've worked with United World Colleges, I've worked with International Baccalaureate, led schools and international schools. That's my part.
Thank you.
I'm Zoe Griffiths. I'm currently CEO and an education consultant for my own company called Alchemy of Learning. I've been living in the Middle East for the last 14 years and worked in public and private sector significantly in different roles throughout that time previously.
Where in the Middle East?
I'm based in the UAE.
Okay. Could we just get our note takers and everyone to introduce themselves as well? That would be nice.
My name is Millie. I'm from South Carolina. I'm based at St. Antoni's College. I did African Studies last year, and I'm doing comparative international education this year. So we're just helping out, volunteering.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paco. I'm a first-year DPhil in comparative international education, and my research is on widening access to higher education in Ghana.
Great, thank you.
So I'm Nick Hacker. I run Teach Man to Fish. We do skills education, kids in schools in developing world.
I'm Amber Khalidi, and I'm from Mental Trust International, which is an NGO that works on access to education in East Africa, and I live in Oxford, so not very local.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Chloe, and I'm a PhD student here at Oxford in the Department of Education.
Hi, my name is Camila. I'm from Brazil. I work at Tele Social Foundation. We develop different programs with the public sector and also NGOs.
Hello everyone, I'm Shekhova and I'm from Southern Federal University. I teach there a master's program in international comparative education.
Thanks. And I don't think I introduced myself and started talking. My name is Akila. I work with our Khan Foundation. I used to be a previous Oxford student as well, master's and PhD. And so I'm representing both sides, blue and green. So I used to work in India for 3 years designing education, ECD and adolescent girls programs, and now I'm here in London and I'm their education and ECD focal point. So if we can start the video if you want, or however it is, but if the panel members could just spend a quick minute introducing themselves.
Yes. Hi, I'm Mahesh Prasad, originally from India. I'm based at Utkal University as an assistant professor at the Department of Psychology, Agency Center of Advanced Study in Psychology. I'm a psychologist by training, but I'm also trained in public health and global health. So I do a lot of interdisciplinary work. I'm moving to London very soon, taking a leave from my academics to join students in soon. So I'll become a student very soon at UCL. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm going to present some of the work that we are very passionate about and we have been doing for the past few years in the Kashmir Valley in Pulwama. And rest will follow. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Meghna. I'm a third-year PhD student at University of Cambridge. And my research has been based in Delhi, where I look at the mathematics curriculum and especially how it's represented in textbooks and how ultimately teachers get to use them in the classrooms. So I've collected my data and I'm now analyzing and writing up.
Hi, I'm Juliana. I am a graduate student at the London School of Economics. I'm in the Social Policy Department in the Master's in Science of Social Policy and Development. I focus in civil society in that Master's, and I'll be focusing on my dissertation on the role that foundations are playing in Brazil in impacting educational policies. Yeah, and I'm going to be talking about my essay. I have a background a little bit as a practitioner. I used to work for a foundation called Portuguese. You might have met colleagues of mine who are here today. I worked with them in Brazil as a grant manager, working with Latin America, so Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, mostly around like development of social emotional skills. At the time, we were also looking at early childhood development. And then I took a position in the global team of the organization in Switzerland. I was a practice coordinator. We had this community of practice to share knowledge and exchange information about what was going on in the different offices around the world, and that's what I coordinated.
Thank you. So we're just going to start the presentation, 10 minutes each, and I'd request if you could hold your questions till once they're done, and then we'll open the floor and we can have a topic discussion. So we're going to actually start with Juliana first, please.
Okay, great. So I am not, my background is not in education, although I have experience in that. I am actually a social, my bachelor's was in social sciences. I worked for a teacher for a few years, and now I'm studying education policy. So when I was thinking about the questions proposed for this event, I was actually rereading the Pedagogy of the Oppressed from Paulo Freire, who is a very famous pedagogue Brazilian, and the book is actually commemorating its 50th anniversary this year. And I felt there are some really relevant reflections there that could be used to think about education in uncertainty. So basically, just to give a little bit of context, when he wrote this book, we were going through a dictatorship period in Brazil, so a lot of limiting political action. He was actually extradited for a while. So he's thinking very much in this dual perspective about how education, in the way that it only transfers information and doesn't really develop critical thinking skills and reflection in students, is actually a tool for power domination, let's say, so for keeping things as they are, maintaining the status quo. So he's discussing this relationship that he calls about the oppressed and the oppressors. He tries to be malleable in the sense that he recognizes that people who oppress can also be oppressed. But basically that's the idea, that education can either be a tool for empowerment, or it can be a tool, a means to limit people's actions and constrain their agency. So in general lines, what he's saying is he advocates for an education that is liberating and humanizing. He says we should focus on really promoting what makes us most human, which is this ability to reflect, to solve problems, to dialogue with each other and build consensus, to be able to overcome the problems in our reality. And that all seemed very relevant when we were discussing this context of uncertainty and an ever-changing reality. We have more and more pressing problems, so that's kind of the connection we're making. He's discussing this idea of education as liberating, which he calls, can be called problem-posing education, or some people call it like project-based education. And we've seen an example in the previous panel when Mike was exposing his experience in his classroom working with the students in Malawi via project-based and getting learnings from that and actually doing something to change reality. This is the sort of education that Freire advocates for, as opposed to what he calls a banking education that is going to seek to just transfer knowledge and seeks to maintain conformity. This banking education also has a big focus on the individual as opposed to the collective. It has no connection to prior knowledge of the students, so it doesn't tap into the potential that people have to build connections and to use their learning to expand on that. And the education he's proposing is supposed to do that. The book is very theoretical in a sense. It can be a little hard to read, but I feel the ideas are still very useful. Freire's concept of reality is that reality is always changing, and therefore education should enable children to navigate this reality. Not only children, he talks a lot about education for adults as well, as a means to navigate this reality and learn to deal with its complexities. So at the same time that this is aspirational, the kind of education he's promoting, which is it's really going to focus around dialogue and developing these critical thinking skills. They are all very relevant for some of the discussions we already had too on the future of work and what's going to happen, so the whole aspect of developing social and emotional skills. If we look at any report around what are the skills that employers are going to be looking for, or they are looking for now, they are all about problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordination, collaboration, service orientation, which is very connected to this idea that Freire was speaking about back then. To me, that is very relevant because it also brings us back to the sense of education as a means to not only empower students, but create a sense of cohesion and belonging to a community, and developing skills that I also think are critical for the challenges we are facing now around citizenship and civic skills in general. So enabling students to not only deal with this problem, but to create this sense of belonging and answer to their community's needs by working on projects, for example, that target specific needs. So in thinking about that, I was exploring, so my essay was much more theoretical, that's the essence of it, talking about this critical thinking and reflection power in an era of uncertainty and this idea of an ever-changing reality. But I tried to look at examples from Latin America where this kind of education is being implemented. And we have a very good example in Brazil there's a center called CPCD, which is a popular center for culture and development, which basically is the implementation of this project-based education in action. So it's a rural area, and the founder, he's an anthropologist and an educator, so he created this project. It's an after-school project, and children learn by doing things for the community, and the community is very engaged in the project as well. So there are a series of initiatives going on there. It's not only to reinforce the knowledge they get from school, but they're also like training for the community to develop economically, because this is a poor area in one of the states in Brazil. And what is interesting there is that some of the learnings are, he's talking about how we can disrupt the classroom, so the classroom not being in this, boxed environment, but actually taking children out and bringing them to the community and thinking about how this relationship is built, and doing the opposite as well, bringing the community to school. So there's this deep community engagement, and he uses different kinds of pedagogies. One of them, two of them I would like to highlight. One is this use of the local knowledge. So in general, these solutions for the community, they are built based on the experiences of the students, and then from that, with this academic learning that they had, they are going to develop the solution. So it's a much more collaborative process, and this idea of dialogue is very much present, because all the time students are negotiating between what they already learned and expanding on that knowledge to tackle those problems. And then the second idea that I wanted to bring was this, he talks about measuring the success of the initiatives by this, instead of a human development index, he developed this potential of human development index, which is about what are the strengths that people bring, and how can we use these strengths, how can we measure them, identify them, and then use them to tackle the problems we have in our reality. Another initiative which is very connected to that, it is also being applied throughout Latin America is service learning. It's a very similar idea of project-based learning, so basically students, like Mike explained in the previous session, they go to the community, identify problems, do some research to identify what are the most pressing needs of the community, come back and work in the classroom to develop ways to solve it. And through that, they develop skills in science, math, literacy, etc. So many interesting experiences are happening in Latin America at the moment. And then I feel what we could do maybe here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is what are the challenges that these kinds of solutions bring? I think we have many resources around the issues we have been discussing. We have different kinds of indicators, we have different kinds of methodologies, approaches, very nice experiences that are happening everywhere. But how do we scale them? How do we measure them? How do we convince people that this is the way education should be? How do we link this broad policy level to what's actually happening on the ground? And if I think particularly in the context of Latin America, how do we develop future citizens? So more than workers, if we develop this critical thinking, reflection, dialogue skills, we are going to be answering to these future work skills. So I feel, also because it's changing a lot, I feel that shouldn't be the goal of education. We should step away from this utilitarian view a little bit and focus more on what kind of citizen we want to work and what kinds of citizens are going to be able to respond to these ever-changing realities and more pressing challenges. Yep, that's it.
Thank you, Juliana. That was amazing. I can't say the name as beautifully as you do. I'm going to try now. Because now I'm feeling on the spot, but the author that you mentioned, I think he's a favorite. He was a favorite when I was a student as well. So, thank you. We can go to your second.
Okay, I'm just going to... Okay.
Right. So I think you've got some slides for us, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I would like to start with a few pictures and then I would maybe... Yep, that one. Okay. Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. The presentation that I'm doing about today is the narratives of children's emotional life world in a war-affected zone in Pulwama, Kashmir Valley. So I'll take you quickly through some of the pictures and then we'll discuss what we did and what we found out. So this is a picture of the school from Pulwama and nearby surrounding regions. I'll be showing several schools and pictures of them and how youth and children of that area are coping with the region. This is an abandoned school wherein children are not visible at all. As you can see, this is a school. This is still intact. This has not gone through any impact of war as such, but impact is visible because children are not coming to the school. Similarly, in this school, as you can see, there is a particular note being written. If it is visible, contact the hospital in case of emergency. These children are housed in a particular house because they don't have a school yet, and the parents obviously perceive that they are not very safe going to the school. This is another school from the same region wherein children are met with hardened realities. The children are either sitting outside of the room because they don't have adequate facilities. Most facilities which they had, limited facilities, are already destroyed, or some facilities are not being used and abandoned. This is another similar facility in Pulwama. This is something which I'm going to talk about. This is the youth, the younger adolescent group which we studied in our age group. So before we go to the study, I would like to tell you about the place that we actually studied. This is, I hope all of you are aware of Kashmir Valley. If you're not aware of Kashmir, Kashmir is a land which is very beautiful. It's part of India, it's part of Pakistan, but people of Kashmir have their own doubts regarding who do they belong to, what citizenship do they have, and equally people who are living on the other side of the border in Kashmir Valley in Pakistan also have their own concerns. So Kashmir belongs to both India and Pakistan, but then people of Kashmir across borders feel that they belong to one state known as Kashmir, so they don't themselves identify as citizens of either Pakistan or of India. So growing up in Kashmir can be horrifying, can be inspirational, can be also harrowing. So this is a place which we studied is Pulwama. Pulwama is a beautiful small town, used to be known as city of milk, because it used to produce a lot of farmland and a lot of sort of dairy products. It is almost 40 kilometers away from the Srinagar. Srinagar is the capital of Kashmir in India. So this particular study was conducted between 2016 to 2018, and this study is still ongoing. Why it took such a long time for a pilot study is because this place which we studied is full of militancy and a lot of activities. If you have to do a field work there, then it will be very difficult to actually go and do field work. So I have been going there during several visits in past. But I have some of my friends who are psychology graduates and education graduates based in Srinagar. They are really very helpful in terms of conducting the study as well as collecting data. It was once known as Anand Kashmir because this place was known to be the land of happiness. Kashmir is known to be the second heaven of India or the world, or whatever you can say. But then for past 70 years, since India got its independence, it has seen a lot of turbulence and chaos, and obviously there is no peace with which Kashmir was associated with always. So these children are living there. Obviously generations have got affected. Over past 70 years, lots of things have happened, but historiographically nothing has been much recorded, and not much goes into literature. So we went on there basically to conduct a study on youth in the age group of 18 to 30 years, initially about 2012. And then we found that it is not just the issue of youth, but it's also the issue of adolescents and children. So it's a generational learning experience and living experience that we have to explore. And we found that this is something that we need to emphasize on. There are a few issues with which we started, like how do the experiences of partition on Kashmiris and those who are displaced, dispossessed and disenfranchised, and fear of separation gets transmitted into youngsters. Second issue which we experience is what are the phenomenological experiences, poignant voices of those who have lived and dealt with constant tension of desettlement and resettlement, and how does that get reflected in the growing psyche of Kashmiri youth and children? And how do the youths of today make meaning around their identity, culture, ethnicity and space while trying to recover from cross-generational victimization with inability to consolidate their life forces and move on? These are three big questions that we asked while we conducted the study. We went on and we, obviously there have been a lot of studies which have focused, but not quite reported. They have focused on how people live in a living region in Kashmir. However, the strength and coping style and resilience of youth and children are not adequately emphasized, and therefore our study. So we went on and we studied, this is a pure qualitative study wherein we took about 12 children's beautiful narratives. These are children and adolescents in the age range of 12 to 19 years, and they were interviewed on themes of effect of war, atrocities and resultant suffering and trauma on their coping style, mental and physical health, overall adjustment, aspiration and desire for future, and overall concept of self and well-being. This study aimed at exploring phenomenologically how children's lives are impacted by continual exposure to perennial situation of war, anarchy and agony of homelessness. The experience of constant tension around violence and the state of perturbance leaves an indelible imprint on the minds of children, and thereby significantly influences their overall life and learning experiences. However, youth do see a sign of opportunity to grow beyond all the bloodshed, war and atrocity. In spite of constantly traumatic experiences, they actively participate in the educational processes, example going to school almost every day, doing homework in despicable and most adverse conditions, which includes very little or no food, safe shelter, and often electricity, amplifies several times by the security concerns. Some adolescents engage in social media platforms increasingly and forums to discuss, disseminate, reflect, argue, and create pathways for conflict resolution and peaceful transformations. One of the most interesting themes which was unraveled during the process of interaction is how actively children emerge as harbingers of change and as torchbearers of reality to the larger world, wherein all essence of adult peace education, conflict resolution, and remediation vanish into thin air, when children's deeply moving tale, profound with lessons and human principles, are voiced. Educational policies are required to instill human thinking and attitude in children, and these children have already exceeded expectations of human attributes in our study. Although children are victims of poor political will and strategy to handle inner and external tensions and thereby losing most of their valuable moments, most of them have positive faith in democracy and the world, although they are still developing a concept of democracy, formally speaking. Although they are subjected to constantly troubling and excruciating life journey colored by profound trauma and sickening uncertainty, they are imbued with a sense of resilience as clarified in their narratives on the jeopardizing effects of war. Most children wish to collaborate, learn and grow as a community along with the rest of India as much as with the cross-border people and worldwide, and rather than being seen as a constant object of suspicion as Kashmiris are generally perceived. The following key themes emerged in our study and we have put them into 5. First is uncoiling violence. Wrapped around violence and inertia, children and adolescents perceive that their lives are interwoven intricately, to a degree inevitably so, with constant experiences of violence, instability, and chaos. Second theme emerged as no place to call home. Amidst all this work, children and adolescents especially found it very unfortunate to, while narrating their experiences of growing up, having no fixed places to call their home. Because if you look at Pulwama has undergone at least 100 bombings in past 4 to 5 years. So, often they have fled from one place to the other, hiding under the army barracks, tunnels, harboring such precarious, intimidating life experiences, marked by disintegration from what should be their ordinary intimate spaces. This is certainly problematic and likely to leave a permanent damage in the minds of children. The third theme which emerged as schooling as a secondary engagement. Obvious it is that if you are going through all these growing experiences while you are in your instrumental and early years of your life, obviously it will be stressful enough, as was emphasized in today's early presentation. One of the dominant narratives which emerged during the focus group as well as in-depth interviews is regarding how they attribute and rate it as a secondary need. Education wasn't quite emphasized as an important need. Some of them felt that education might not be actually able to contribute to their life. Their lack of relatedness to education attainment can be attributed to lack of incentivization, support, and provision of safe and secure learning and living spaces. After all, whose responsibility is it? This is something that we as education policy makers or scholars or as people who are interested in education, I think education concerns all of us, we need to think about. The fourth theme is dreams, compromises, and uncertain futures. Children and especially the adolescents express deep concerns on their unfulfilled dreams, constant fear of being persecuted, and how they have compromised severely to survive, and thereby remain majorly preoccupied with thoughts of an uncertain future, wherein learning and education didn't and couldn't find appropriate placement. Overall, a picture wherein their dreams were painted as sabotaged objects with reality of a victim made itself evident. And the last and the most important, which I want to emphasize enough, and probably I can't emphasize more than enough, is surviving learners. However, some children appeared to be determined, resilient, and most optimistic when it came to their attitude to learning processes and outcomes at the end of the year. It's not like schools have closed down. They were in operation, informally so, wherein 2/3 of the time school remained closed and or destroyed. We term them as surviving learners, as they were the symbols and oases of hope in regions of such conflict and contestations, and offer a scope to reimagine the limitless possibilities beyond war, border, context, and time. In this context, the term surviving learner is used to denote all individuals who exhibit extraordinary resiliency to survive and thrive despite all disparities, adversities, and conflicting life situations. This profound desire to thrive and strive, to excel in spite of several limitations in the life, context, and geography, offers us the notional possibility of an optimistic future and intentional serendipity. Therefore, a surviving learner is not only one who has risen above adversities, but has continued to learn under all circumstances and turned pebbles into diamonds, metaphorically speaking. So therefore, it is up to us as scholars interested in educational policies, especially in educational policies in uncertain world as it is becoming. And we already have an uncertain world wherein children are concerned about their future. Not a lot of adults are concerned, which is unfortunate. We need to think seriously on this and what we can do. It is apparent that children's lives are emotionally and materially devastated with trauma, suffering and deprivation, injuring their inner selves and affecting their full potential development, which could probably thrive with provision of proper educational opportunities. So this is for us now to think reflexively, and how do we use reflexive dialogue and critical appreciative inquiry for skill building and achievement of agency among youth and children and adolescents. How can we as academic and activists with public intervene in instilling scope for resilience and life skills among the children and youth, which is quite a critical mass of India if you look at it. Can we hope for a convergence of academic, therapeutic as well as socio-political processes being facilitated by state and its agencies? So while I am talking about these questions, they might sound like a lot of mind-boggling ideas, but when you go to the field, basically you need to focus on what are the concerns of the children, how they be able to live a life of hope and optimism, and what can we do in order to make their lives better. These are concerns when we go to the field, we are faced with. Because when we go to Kashmir also, we face a lot of intimidation, and we feel also the equal amount of insecurity. Because the militancy activity is so much and so rampant that we as researchers also feel insecure while operating in Kashmir. I have been only thrice in my whole life to Kashmir, and on 3 occasions. The first occasion was for youth study, 2 occasions for this children and adolescent study, and I found it to be really nerve-wracking, because each time you have to go through so much of processing paper and so much of checking and everything. You feel almost you are in another country, you are no longer in your own country. And when the children also face lots of issues, children are being searched. You won't believe the children are being searched by the Indian Army, as if they are hiding some guns or some bombs or something of that sort. So these children are being put under suspicion, as well as they are also suffering all this trauma. So they don't know who to revert to, what issues, what would they do in order to survive, and obviously they do have a lot of such issues as I presented. So it is for all of us to think about such contexts and maybe devise a plan of action, practical plan of action, which would really help the children and adolescents to have a bright future of optimism and hope. That's all. Thank you.
The story of Kashmiri youth to us is very inspiring, and I have some questions about surviving learners and the resilience that they have. We'll come to that later. So just our last presentation.
I'm also going to be talking about the Indian context, but not conflict-affected areas in specific. What I'll be focusing on is the notion of value given to mathematics education as a part of the policy discourse, and also compare it with the mainstream Hindi film, which I'll just show a clipping of to give a context of what I'm going to talk about.
You can take this.
बच्चों 10वीं के परिणाम ये बता देते हैं कि कौन अपने देश का हो रहा है और से पढ़ाते हैं क्लास वही बुक्स दीदी तो मुझे तो नहीं लग रही होगा 10वीं पास कर पाएगी
Because no point in the history of formal mainstream education have we seen so many children going to schools. And currently in India, some counts even add up to about 97% of children who are currently enrolled in school. So at the heart of this kind of expansion lies this question that what is the value of this education for these children? And especially children belonging to marginalized backgrounds, disadvantaged backgrounds. And the question that I'll be addressing more critically in this presentation is actually the value of mathematics education in specific. As you saw, there's a lot of emphasis given to mathematics and success in maths. And that's not always over-exaggerated because it does determine a lot of future life chances. Pursuing the subject at the end of schooling determines entry into a lot of high-status careers and also competitive areas of studies, including engineering, computer programming, accountancy, and many more. Yet, if we look at the statistics and we look at the number of children who ultimately benefit from this mathematics, it's actually, according to some of the studies from All India Survey of Higher Education, only 10% of children in that age group ultimately do any kind of maths later on or pursue any kind of career which is using the maths that's taught in schools. So, and it's not surprising that that 10% actually often belongs to middle or upper middle class families. So we have a 90% remaining rest of the children who are often from disadvantaged background who don't use any maths in their careers or professions or in any way later on in their lives. So having given this background, I'm using Julian Williams, who's a maths educator, his notion of use and exchange value in mathematics. And to again talk about this film and the policy document that's currently being implemented in India. So William defines the exchange value as the value which enables students to use success in mathematics as a currency for economic benefits. This is what we're familiar with, the notion that you do well in maths and then you get better jobs. And according to, if you think about this definition, the urgency of the fact that only 10% reap benefits from maths becomes quite critical. And the film clearly emphasizes on the importance of this exchange value throughout. And maths, as rightly so, is portrayed as a critical gatekeeper for future career chances. However, the film also recognizes some structural barriers. As we saw in the trailer itself, social disadvantage or lack of social capital is being labeled as lack of luck or kismat. But significantly, it is also noted that these can be overcome by hard work or mehnat. So this idea is being promoted throughout the film. Further, there is a critical recognition of other forms of reproduction of inequities that persist in Indian society. For example, the caste inequity, which often gets passed on through our notion of professions and who can go into what profession. As you saw, this girl has internalized that, saying that a maid's daughter can only be a maid. So a lot of the notions of reproduction of inequities is being addressed. Yet we see the mother-daughter struggle to work hard as individuals and are shown to be able to break these kinds of social barriers. So this is a clear portrayal of the contradictory nature that Williams also talks about, that it is clear that getting access to maths can be used to exchange for, as an exchange for better future and brighter future, yet it is accompanied by structural difficulties. In contrast to such an exchange value, Williams also talks about the use value of mathematics. So he defines this as the intrinsic value in learning disciplinary maths, which contributes towards the psychosocial development of the learner. And this is where the difference becomes quite important, because actually the National Curriculum Framework, the policy document which I am comparing the film with, also talks about these two values and talks about narrower aims and higher aims. So narrower aims are seen as related to employability aims that students get access to by learning math, but also higher aims is related to the development of the child's inner resources. In other words, the value of attaining disciplinary mathematics or understanding. So NCF also goes on, the curriculum document, which is NCF 2005, also critically prioritizes the higher aim of maths learning and teaching and makes recommendations aligned with it. And this is a similar trend across the world, where we see a notion of ambitious mathematics learning going on, moving away from the notion of procedural learning and narrow aims, but moving towards how do we make children understand the notion of what doing maths really means. Interestingly, the film also actually goes on to address the notions around use aspect. And while they show the girls struggling with math, there's a really interesting conversation between the struggling daughter and a studious friend of hers in the classroom, where they try to unpack why math is so difficult. And the boy replies saying that you don't understand maths because you have never tried to understand it. Try and become friends with maths, and there is nothing more fun with that. And this is quite interesting because there's a clear kind of association and pathway to success in maths is being linked with the notion of fun, and that you can make maths fun. And also he goes on to say that if you link mathematics with your life experiences, you then make it fun. And in the film, actually, there's a critical moment where we see the mother and the daughter learning math by making local language abbreviations of formulas and procedures. And also we see them going around in markets and kind of noticing the math in every day, and hence enjoying the mathematics that they're learning in schools. So these pedagogical suggestions might be reinforcing rote-based procedural learning, because they're still kind of trying to memorize the formulas. But there is a recognition of the fact that maths needs to be made fun and relatable to daily life. Actually, studies in India by many scholars like Farida Khan, Yasmin Siddharth Khan, and Arindam Bose, and K. Subramaniam, and many more, have looked at communities in tribal, rural, as well as urban India, where children often engage with different cultural and economic mathematical activities which are different from those taught at school. So it is thus not unreasonable to engage in these ideas of integrating school and out-of-school maths, which is portrayed in the film. In fact, the NCF document, the policy document, also attempts to introduce these kind of newer pedagogies, and they often talk about linking maths to students' lives and language to enable access to school mathematics. However, unlike the film, which aims to crack the exam and hence the exchange value, NCF's recommendations are ways of achieving the higher aims of learning disciplinary math. Yet, some Indian researchers have still even criticized the notion of higher aims at NCF. For instance, Subramaniam claims that the recommendations aims to take away from the focus of narrow aims of procedural learning, but the hierarchy and structure of the syllabus remains aligned with the earlier arrangement, structured to become a pathway for higher education as well as professions. So she says that even though these are kind of trying to move away from narrow aims, they are still narrow visions of the higher aims. So maths is not being seen purely as economic returns perspective. Yes, there is a particular kind of use value to it which is limited from and has a disciplinary focus perspective. So this is where we must revisit the fundamental contradiction which Williams refers to between exchange and use. So within the paradigm of exchange value of education, there is reproduction of social and structural hierarchies which determines who gets access to the benefits of exchange value. So how much can the use value and its understanding be changed to make this exchange value less hegemonic? So some critical educators, and I'm actually drawing from Paulo Freire's work, etc., has looked at other notions of critical math education and ethnomathematics to do that. So I'll just kind of conclude and say that in the Indian context, the underprivileged child is often deprived of structural support and make it harder for them to do well in maths in school. But often the failure is attributed to the ability of the child. And so the messaging of the film, which reinforces the notion that hard work can set you free, can be a bit unsettling in that context. Yet, its potential, even though perhaps this kind of exchange value is exaggerated that it might set you free, potential value is understood in the Indian context, that what can be the potential for math. And so the one notion related to the use value which comes out in the film and in the NCF is the notion of connecting maths to daily life. And I believe that this can be the kind of basis of a lot of research that needs to be done in the Indian context to understand how it can become meaningful for the 90% of the people who are alienated from the disciplinary math. And I feel like unless these are explicitly researched and mathematics exchange values will continue to dominate the large majority, who will continue to live under uncertain circumstances with the hope that maths will set them free. So.
Thank you so much, that was interesting. And I would say that, I mean, the aspirations of that mother, that what she wants for her child, to, I think, break the socioeconomic class. I think, and what she envisions education or maths will help her achieve. I think that's really interesting. So I think we're shutting the video off and we're opening the floor to questions. So if you have any questions that you